I'm Chris Bussing. Welcome to my channel. It's committed to helping more people unlock personal transformation through success in tech sales and the pursuit of self-development. There's another way to unlock personal transformation that I didn't think about until recently, and that's actually writing a book. Only 1.3% of people who start writing a book actually carry it to completion and launch it successfully. Today, Eric Koester, am I saying it right? Is it Koester or Koester? We got to get it right.
It's anything with a "k" and an "er." So it's actually Koester, like general, but like you're in the ballpark, so you count. It's all good.
General Koester, and potato, what actually does matter. So Eric Koester has actually helped crack the code to exactly what you need to do from a process perspective to launch a book successfully. He's coached over 2,000 plus authors. He's written his own books that got, was it 15,000 sales in the first year, roughly? Like how well did your first
1 year? Crazy enough, yeah.
So, I mean, this guy's the real deal, and I'm going to be working with him myself. I'm really excited for this. This is a perspective that we haven't heard before on the channel. So before we dive into the nitty gritty, of course, like the video because the YouTube algorithm loves that too. And we'll show this video to more people who could benefit from the message. Subscribe to the channel because I've got your back every week with inspiring interviews with folks like Eric. And also check out the link in the description of this video to book time with Eric if you're serious about making your dreams a reality and writing a book. So Eric, let's dive into it. First of all, thank you for being here. And second of all, could you tell us how you ended up on this path of creating creators and why is it meaningful to you?
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad, I'm excited to be on this journey because I think not everyone gets the chance to sort of like understand those early moments of starting a book project, right? I mean, so you're starting this new book project. And I think a lot of what I think will be interesting for anyone who's like, oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah. By the way, I don't, it's funny. I had Matt Dixon, the author of the Challenger sale on, and we had 3 1-minute outages. I don't want to interrupt the gold you're dropping. It was on your end or my end?
All right, cool. Well, I think we're good. I think it looked like I flipped for just a second. So
okay. We're back at it, man.
We're at it. Yeah. So
I always say this, Eric, in sales and life, sometimes it's sloppy, but we keep going. So go ahead.
We're going to go through it, man. Yeah. I mean, so I think what's amazing about books as this premise is that they're the most sort of common thing that aspirational people want to do. So 81% of us who have a bucket list have write a book on it. So it's a thing that people want to do as part of their life's purpose, their life's mission, their life's ambition. And yet it is objectively one of the most difficult things that we can do as an individual. Less than 2% of people, 1.3% according to the New York Times, of percent of people who start a book will ever finish it. And so I think what's neat about books is they are this amazing thing because there's something that we know is important. We know matters. When we do it, it means a lot, but yet it's really hard to do. And particularly it's very lonely to do along the way. So I'm excited to basically chat with you a little bit in this early days of it, because I think not everyone understands that so much of this is not about the process of actually sitting down and putting fingers on keyboard. It's about the mindset. It's about the approach and the support networks we build in order to accomplish things. I sort of believe in books in this way of, if you want to go fast, or hopefully maybe get there, you go alone. But if you want to go far and make it something awesome, you bring a whole party along with you. So for me, the book thing happened, honestly, as a big happy accident. So I actually had books change my life. So when I was in my 20s, I wrote and published my first book. And it was not some like bestseller. I didn't make any money from it. But suddenly all these things started to happen. I got, invited to serve on boards. I got to start my first company, all these things. And it was because people perceived me differently. So one of the things that came to me as a result of writing a book was actually the fact that I got invited to teach a class at Georgetown. Now, candidly, I would not have gotten into Georgetown as an undergraduate. So the fact that I get to teach there is shocking, right? I'm not as smart as Chris over here. I had to back my way in, and I got in because I had written these 2 books. Yeah. And so I was teaching a class on entrepreneurship, and it was a fun class. I enjoyed the teaching of it, but I would tell you it felt very unfulfilling. Like it wasn't like I was changing the lives of these students. And so I literally told Georgetown, I quit. I'm done. Like, I enjoy you, but I'm not teaching this class anymore. And they said, no, you can't. And no, what do you mean? No, it can't. We don't have anyone to teach it. You have to teach the class. And so I found myself like kind of frustrated. I was like, well, I don't want to teach this class that doesn't mean anything. It's not impacting people. People aren't starting companies. And so I thought about it more. I said, well, what what if I just use the same principles of starting a company and I made everyone in class start a book? And it was a crazy story. I walked into class now having never done it before, never taught anyone to write a book. And I told the class on the first day, all of you are going to write a book this semester. And I remember the look on their faces. It was like this terror and horror and like, they didn't want to be there. Like, what am I doing? And, but at the end of the class, I told them, listen, I know this is crazy. I know it's one of those things, but, if you're serious about investing in yourself, I'll help you do this thing. Now, there was a dozen people in the class that day. And as I saw them file out of class, I thought, they're not going to come back. Like maybe one or two people will come back, but this thing's, you know, hopefully one person or two people stay. The next week I get to class, the class had tripled in size. It became one of the biggest, most popular classes on campus.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment, two very important things that have changed the entire way I see the world. Number one, people want to do hard things. They want to do things that matter, that are meaningful. Like people want to do things that have this change your life ability and potential. Like that's why you're doing it. But they also don't want to do it alone. And so when you start to realize that there's a way to help people do something that's meaningful, do something that will change their lives and others, and not do it alone, you have an opportunity to change people's lives. And so that's why I love this thing. I do this thing. That first class of 16 people that became authors was, you know, honestly transformative for me. And I've made this commitment to help 10,000 modern authors over the next 10 years, 2,000 down, which is pretty wild. But here we are trying to help more people be able to use a book as a way to learn and accomplish their dreams.
You've really already knocked out a huge chunk. That's 20%.
It's a big chunk, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of wild. I thought it was going to take me like forever, but it turns out when you're doing something special and you have a way for people to do it with the community and support, turns out people are attracted to be a part of this, which is cool to see.
You know what's beautiful? I think the two primary ways we access meaning is by shouldering a burden, like you said, doing something hard, but a burden that is worthwhile, that is impactful. And writing a book is an example of that. And it's just for individuals to be able to express their ideas and who they are, that's a beautiful thing. And then to connect in community. And would you say that by going through a process, this labor of love alongside your students and others, I guess they're all your students, have you built really meaningful relationships in the process as well? I can't imagine.
Yeah, I think what's powerful about it, I think, you know, and I'm just going to do my little humble brag here. You can see all these books over here and over here behind me. If you see the full wide screen there, every one of these books is a signed first edition book from one of these authors. So I have a library behind me of 2,000 people. And I think what's interesting about it is, you know, my relationship with every author is different, right? You know, some people I spend more time, other people, you know, they're part of the community in that way. But what I'll say is I constantly hear from people about how this changed them. And so I think my relationship is like when I started this thing, I just wanted to do something that was meaningful for the students, for the authors. I wanted something that mattered to them. And so what's neat for me is I get to basically play a small part of everyone's journey. And for me, I get to have this experience where I help people do one of the hardest things they'll do in their life. And that is an amazing accomplishment. And we also, you know, part of this too is what we found in our community approach is that we've really opened up the aperture for people who have always wanted to write a book, but didn't know how. And so we are the only B Corp, the public benefit corp, you know, sort of a social venture in the world of writing and publishing. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that we could make this accessible. So over 40% of our authors in our community are authors of color. We have this incredibly diverse array of people who are, you know, novelists and nonfiction and memoirists. And so I think that's what's so neat about it is every author is unique. And we've tried to create this place to make it special for them and frankly, do the hardest thing they've ever done in their life, but not have to do it alone.
And so the company's Manuscripts, right?
Manuscripts is a company.
And so can you explain a little more between the decision to be a B Corp? Obviously, it seems like it might play into the diversity and it's just a benevolent organization. But what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah. So, you know, I think part of it was, so for me, I mean, a big belief in this one is to sort of remember that when I started out this one, this was purely like how can I actually do something that means something to people? And I think what I will tell you in general, when you think a little bit about the book world is for a long time, the authors were really like the workforce, but not the heroes, right? So for publishing for the last 500 years, when an author wrote a book, they gave that book to the publisher and they didn't own it. And so it's interesting to sort of think about is I've always believed in the centering of putting the center of the universe around the author, helping them use their book to create opportunities, to create, something they care about, they own. And so I think that was a big part of it. When we set out on a mission and we wanted to help modern authors, people who wanted to own their work, who wanted to build an audience, use modern tools and have a better economic outcome. And so I think that's a lot of it, like the centering on like the person as opposed to the product, I think really makes a difference when you're trying to build a type of organization that people, want to be a part of.
1.3% of people start a book and actually finish it. Why is that number so low? Why is it so hard? What are the stumbling blocks that people run into?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to flip the script a little bit here because you're the interviewer and I'm going to flip it onto you a little bit to sort of think through it. And so, you shared with me a little bit that you've wanted to write a book for a very long time, right? So tell me, like, what was that spark that said, this is on my bucket list for you? And we'll talk about kind of why it's hard for people to get out the gates and why a different approach can help. So when did you start wanting to write a book and why?
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited to dig into this. I love your flipping the script, and audience, know we're going to get into the process of exactly how to write a book too. So there's a lot to look forward to. Make sure to stay to the end. I think that when I had a period of uncertainty in my life, when I was transitioning from Oracle to Google, I had a funny situation that might go in a book one day or a speech, which is I left my job prematurely, having made it through all the Google interview process. And even I knew I was a shoo-in for the board approvals. That's part of their process. I'm good on paper. I got into Georgetown, right? And the recruiter's like, you're good. And so I thought I was going to be a hero. This is Chris's world. And I'm going to tell my manager, Monty at Oracle, that I'm planning to go to Google. We'll pick we pick a voluntary unemployment date 2 months down the road. And I'll get someone trained up to take my spot. I'll be a hero. I won't blindside my own manager, blah, blah. That was a dumb thing to do because Google hit a hiring freeze and now we're in a tough economic climate. And so hiring freezes happen. I had to work with AWS. They're in a hiring freeze and, that happens, but it led to 6 months of unemployment or fun employment where it was just crazy because I ended up becoming a dog walker for WAG. And let's just say I had a lot of free time on my hands. I used to walk the dog Finley in Boston that was 5 pounds. That was adorable. And at first I felt this freedom. And amidst that freedom, I had the space to start writing, Eric. So I ideas were coming to me and I was writing like these, actually probably 50 pages. And that's actually where I started to get the inclination that I have a message to share. I want to write a book. And I also got the feedback since my Georgetown days that I love to encourage people. So they're like, you should be a motivational speaker or a therapist. I don't think I listen well enough to be a therapist. So but anyway, so that was
self-aware.
And just to tie a bow on the story, and story time will end, is I did end up getting the job 6 months later, and it was a miracle because it could have fell through. Yeah, with the recruiter, but that unexpected chaos was what actually led to the creative spirit emerging.
And I think, so I think just to sort of build on that a little bit, I think that what's interesting about it is that for most of us, it's sort of like you found that you needed a creative something that you could own, that you could sort of create, that you could have. And I think the first thing to know about why books are such an attractive thing for people and why so many people have it on their list is because all humans are seeking to sort of be meaningful, have something that's meaningful. Yeah. And I think what you find is that we seek sort of hobbies and projects. And I think people remember these memories of important books, whether it's nonfiction books that you have on your shelf, whether it's, Harry Potter growing up. I think all of us have that connection to it. And early on, we're taught to read. So I think that's a big part of it is that books are something in our society that means something very much. And, I'll come back to something even just to think about why books are still so important. And people sometimes say, oh, well, like the digital world, all this sort of stuff, are books meaningful anymore? I still believe that books are probably the most dense piece of learning information you can get in the world, right? Someone has put years into this thing that you can wind up consuming in a day or two. That's a real service to the world. So I think that what's interesting about it is that for all of us who are ambitious or interesting, I think books are something that are both very, very tangible and tactile to us, and also something that we know changed our lives. And so we want it to be able to change someone else's life, whether it's novel, our own story, or whatever it is. So I think that's the first part of it, is understanding that books are difficult, but they're also still worth doing. And so even if you sort of remember that, like, sometimes the things that are the hardest are the most worth doing. And that's why I'd sort of say books are really powerful for all of us. So that's probably the first thing to your question about why books matter is
Yes.
because of the fact that, yeah, you will be able to change someone else's life, but by doing it, you'll change your own. And the research behind it's quite interesting. I think you'll appreciate this too. Part of when people ask me, I study like why books and why other projects matter so much. What's really fascinating about it is two things happen to us when we accomplish a meaningful project in our lives. Like a book is a good one. And there's two things that happen. Number one, the first thing that happens is it changes what we think of ourselves. So remember, here's Chris, ambitious guy, smart guy, has been starting to work on something, but hasn't accomplished it yet, right? And so what's interesting is that makes us feel like, well, gosh, maybe I'm not as good as I thought, or maybe I'm an imposter, whatever it is. But here's what happens first. So when you complete that book, you get it out there, now you've done something that 98.7% of people have failed at. So now you can say to yourself, I have growth. I have a growth mindset. What starts to happen is if you can accomplish this hard thing, you now believe you can accomplish other hard things. So the first thing that changes is what we believe we can accomplish changes. Because we've done something that most people have not been able to accomplish, our own sense of our growth mindset unlocks. And so Carol Dweck talks a lot about success comes from understanding your growth mindset. Doing a project that many people can't do unlocks that. But here's the second thing that happens. So the first thing is you believe you can do more things. But you know what else happens? Now, all those people around you who want to write a book and have seen all these people fail, now they know that Chris is in that 1.3%. They know that Chris is exceptional. So what happens? They come to Chris and say, hey, would you do this thing? Or would you be willing to speak at this place? Or would you be willing to teach me on this one? So it's this spiral that happens. I believe I can do harder things, and people ask me to do harder things. And so I do harder things, and suddenly it creates these inflection points. And so what I love about a project like a book is within 1 year, you can create your own inflection point in life because you see what's possible is different for you and other people see it. And suddenly this trajectory happens where your life will take on this amazing different inflection point.
So how does writing a book unlock your self-awareness?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about that one is there's a quote from an individual who named Shane Parrish. Shane Parrish is the founder of Farnham Street, which is an amazing kind of community of thinkers. And what he writes, in a quote, he's written a book and he writes, the process of writing a book is realizing that you truly didn't understand something. And so I think what really it is, it's humbling. And you know it from having worked on these things. It's like, just putting thoughts down is interesting, right? It's fun to get those things down. But I think you also have a real sense of what it means to be a true expert, because a real expertise comes from a deep mastery of a subject. And it comes from a process of really going through and finding that way that you can take something and find a gap out in the world, that you can communicate it, that you can share it, that you can make people's lives different and better. And so I think what I would sort of say is it's at one hand the most humbling thing that you can do because it's hard, it's challenging. It like really realizes that it's not just like sitting down in front of a paper and, vomiting it out. It takes real depth and thoughts to produce something meaningful. And I think the second part of it, though, is the self-awareness that comes from it is you also realize that it's not that far away from you to be who you want to be. You don't need 50 years to be an expert. I tell people 1 year of dedicated effort into a project like a book, or there's other things like it, but a book in particular will change your life. You just don't exactly know how it's going to change your life yet.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you how writing a book is actually like building a company. Because guys, Eric is an entrepreneur. He's an investor. He comes from that space and there's parallels. So what are the parallels?
Yeah. Well, going back to the original, the original thesis behind this entire class, what I didn't share with you is this was a class of entrepreneurship. It was a class of business school students who wanted to learn how to start companies. Now, I had been teaching a class on how to start companies for several years. I'd worked with guys like Steve Blank, other people on like kind of the science, the iterative mindset, the lean startup mindset of starting companies. Well, when I decided I was going to make everyone write a book, I didn't know how to teach it, right? I didn't go out and get books on, book writing, or I didn't go out and take classes. I've actually never taken a creative writing class in my life. So I had this syllabus that was how to start a company. So what did I do? I took Control F and I pushed find. And every time the word startup was mentioned, I replaced it with book. And that became my syllabus. And what I will tell you behind it is I think that what's interesting about writing a book is a lot like building a company, and that the important thing to know is it's about iterations. It's about rapid iteration through it. And so a lot of what I tell people to do is you don't kind of write a book. You don't sit down and say like, I'm going to write the book. You build all these little pieces. You build the stories from your life. You build the research, the anecdotes, and you have these small iterations. You sort of have this story and you get feedback on it. You have this chapter and you get feedback on it, this draft. So I think the biggest thing to know is that books are not this linear thing that you go through and you sit down in chapter 1 and chapter 12 and then magic happens. It's an iterative process you go through. And that's why I talked to a woman today who was saying, she said this to me, she said, I don't want to rush the process. It should take as long as it takes. Now, I told her that that's not actually the way to think about a book. And what Stephen King says is, I told her you should do as many iterations as it takes to make sure that the book is great, but it's not about a calendar time things. And Stephen King famously says his belief is that you should write a draft of your manuscript in a season. And by season, he means winter season, spring season, summer season. So every author in our program, we give them a structured 4 months with coaching and support to finish a draft manuscript in those 4 months. Now, oftentimes people say, but that's not enough time. It's not going to be great. Remember, you finish something in a season, a draft of it, and then you use that one to iterate on to draft 2 and draft 3 and draft 4. And so that's what I think is interesting about what it's like building a book, a lot like building a company or like building any kind of skill, is that it's not about being great at it. It's about getting to a level and then making that better for the next level and the next level. And so that's what I think is a lot. Like success today is not about being great. It's about iterating your way towards being greater. And that's what I think makes books. And, you know, we've actually produced more National Book Award winners than any other writing program publisher on the planet. And it's not because we expect people to be great. We want to help them have an iterative process to become that way. And that's kind of that mindset of that growth mindset.
So what I'm taking away is just like building a company, you don't have to get it perfect on the first try. You need to get the minimum viable product out there and slowly but surely make it better and better. Like I think of putting words on a paper that might be sloppy and all over the place, but then shaping it like a sculpture and making it better over time. And so I have 2 questions for you before we get into your actual process, which will carry us home for the rest of the conversation. And honestly, I'm very excited about it. There's a book called The War of Art that you might know about.
Yes.
And it's about that force, that invisible force called resistance that I grapple with every day. And that's one of my biggest challenges when it comes to building a course or writing a book, that I sit down at the table and, you know, cause I'm sitting at a table right now and I just have this resistance. I want to distract myself and eat food and socialize and walk my dog and not just sit down and do. And so that's actually one of the biggest challenges I noticed, that invisible force called resistance. What are your thoughts on resistance and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So the first thing is you have to name the beast, right? And so I think humans in general are, you know, we struggle with these sorts of things behind it. And so what's really interesting is there's a lot of research in understanding this divide between what we call distraction and traction. So distraction are doing actions that take us away from what our goal is. So in your case, sitting down and, you know, eating, bringing friends over, watching Netflix, those actions are considered distractions, taking us away, right? The other side of it is actions that take you towards your goal. So this idea of like, there are things that you do coming to a session, talking, interviewing, writing, that kind of stuff. So the real tension is like, what holds us from choosing this action of taking us towards the other action behind it. And so what's important to know is there's actually science that understands what's going on in it. And so in general, what we know is that when we do actions that are taking us away from our goal, it usually is not because that we are being distracted by our friends or by Netflix or whatever it is. These things that are distracting us, it's something internal, these internal triggers, we call them. So the first thing is to understand is to ask yourself why you are pursuing actions that take you away. You've already set the goal. You know you want to do this thing. Why? And so for most people, it comes down to one of 5 things. And we talk about it a lot behind it. There's different things like, you know, being frenetic. But the biggest one that I find is actually insecurity. So what happens to most first-time authors is they feel, why am I qualified to write it? Why should I be the one to do this one? It plays out in that kind of way. And that actually is my biggest concern about my own life, is like, even though I've written things before, am I really qualified to do it? So the first step in actually coming up and defeating those distraction actions is naming it. And so I always tell people that my biggest concern is I am nervous about that. And I say it out loud. I tell people I'm fighting these things. That's the first step in it. The second step in understanding how you defeat this one is to remember that one of the things that happens is you have to be making time for traction. So part of what I think happens is that we have this general rule of like, okay, I should write a book. Well, okay, that's a good macro thing, but you really need to break it down into, I need to sit down for 2 hours and work on this one. So what we find is that it's actually about remembering that if you want to defeat sort of distraction, it's not about kind of these general, well, I should write my book today. It's about saying, I have time on the calendar. And so I would sit down with anyone who has an important project. And if I want to know if you're going to win, I will look at your calendar. And so if you want to write a book, you need to have 4 hours of time blocked off on your calendar every week. That's it. Not a million. And you don't need to have none, but that time. And the third step, so number 1, name the beast. Number 2, make dedicated time for your project, whatever it is. And the third one is probably the most important one. And this is understanding that we as humans, we are pack animals. We look to other people for support, accountability, and quite honestly, guilt. So what I would share with you is if your goal is to make sure you sit down and write those things, find ways that you can create accountability around those blocks of time. So go to a coffee shop and meet someone there so you're both going to write. Go and tell your family you're doing it. Tell your spouse. For me, I tell my wife, I am going to write for 2 hours today. And I tell her that one, not because I'm actually seeking a permission, but because I want her to my brain to know that there's this guilt that I'm going to feel if I don't write when I told her I was going to. So those are the 3 things. You have to name it. What are you afraid of that's pulling you away from it? That's a big one. Number 2, you have to make time for traction. And number 3, you have to use other people to hold you accountable. And those 3 things are the secret to helping people accomplish any kind of like goal that requires traction time over time.
I've got another question that popped up, and
Sure.
then one more, and then we'll dig into the process to carry us home. But the question that popped up is about creativity and can we speed it up? And I want to give you a little more context. When I was selling at Google Cloud, I worked with maybe a virtual effects studio that did video rendering for Marvel movies. It was really cool. And they wanted to leverage cloud computing to spin up the resources that the artists needed to create the virtual effects. But they said, hey, Chris, this is more like let's remove roadblocks or stop signs from the road. We actually cannot accelerate the creativity of the artist. They go at the pace. You can't rush creativity, but let's reduce the barriers to it. And so is that true? Like that you can't really speed up creativity? Because I find in my life, I give myself 2 hours and I don't move as fast as I want to. And creativity hits me at the most random times when I'm in the shower. So what are your thoughts on that? Can you speed up creativity?
Yeah. So it's first off, it's a really good question. And I'm going to pick the middle path on my answer.
Okay.
Because I think that both sides are correct. Right? Like I need my time to be creative and I need to find these things behind it. And yet the other side is like, we need to ship stuff, right? So you've got these 2 competing things behind it. And so what I will tell you a little bit is I think that my approach to creativity is to recognize that the separation between creativity, which is this thoughtfulness versus I call it the acts of creating. So creating is an active sense of those things behind it. So I would separate creativity from creating is that I think you want to remember that creation does not have to be linear. And so here's what I'll share with you. So if you think about it is to create a draft of a book, I'm going to need to spend 100 hours. And so what many people think about the process of doing that, they say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write 4 hours on chapter 1 and the next day, 6 hours on chapter 2. They think of it in this linear way. And what I would tell you is you want to go into the experience of that 2 hours you have blocked off, 4 hours blocked off, and say, how can I maximize my creative outputs based on whatever else is going on? So what I often do is I have time in the morning. I usually have 2 hours blocked off. And some mornings I'll sit down, fingers on keyboard, stuff gets going. It's just great. It really, really happens. And I walk out of it, I was like, holy cow, that would happen. The next day I get there, nothing's happening. So what do? Well, some days I'll just walk away. Like I really will just walk away and move the calendar date to another time. Yeah. But other senses I'll say, hey, maybe I should go pick a different thing that I'm going to write, or maybe I should do some research, or maybe I should do some more. Like part of it is thinking about remembering that you don't necessarily have to go make creation a linear process. It's really designed to be something that you have to be reactive behind it. So I would say I don't know if you can speed it up to the point of like the linear process of it, that seems sort of right. But what I can say is you can be efficient with creation. And that comes from blocking off time and then having a set of activities you can do that can help you feel like you're making advance forward, even if the metric, meaning like the word count or those things that you judge yourself on don't go. Progress is still progress, because I view progress as investing the dedicated amount of time you need to get to that first draft or first milestone.
That's a perspective I never thought about, and I'm sure most of the audience hasn't thought about themselves. So thank you for sharing it. Definitely a nugget. And so next we're going to talk about the process to write a book. But first, there's one more question. We got to have a strong why to carry us through to actually get the book done. And one is that, writing a book unlocks a growth mindset. It helps us become more self-aware. But also we need to dig into the why from a career perspective. Can you give us a couple concrete examples of how a book can catapult someone's career?
Yeah. And I think, so the first thing I'm going to say is kind of what my learning has been working with 2,000 authors. And it's the thing I said to you when we first got on a call a couple of weeks ago, because it often happens that people in my life come back and say, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book. And that's what happens time and time again. And anyone watching this live or afterwards, if you want to have that conversation, please just grab it in the chat. And I love having these conversations because it helps people kind of figure out how they're going to start their journey. But when I tell people and they say, hey, I'm thinking about a book, my answer to them is, I got something to tell you. What I've learned here is we don't launch books, we launch authors. And that's a really important thing to understand, is that books are these powerful things for us. They have these impacts. But books themselves are a pretty terrible business model for us as authors, right? It's a lot of work to sell a $15 product for like $2 or $3. So I focus a lot on how I can help an author leverage their book for what they really want. They want to use it to get promoted and sort of elevate that way and learn skills. They want to use it to get on stages and give a TED talk. They want to use it to do more workshops, instruction, get clients, or do coaching. So the first thing to understand is the why behind a book is that it's a transformative experience. You have to understand what you want to be transformed into. And so what I will share with people who are thinking about this concept of a book is to think about it is, what things do you want to get to do as a result of it? So if you fast forward 6 months from now, 9 months from now, whatever it is, I find there's a couple different things that are important. The first thing I would sort of say what a book will do is it will allow you to usually find career opportunities that are new and that are different. One of my students, for example, really wanted to work in the world of soccer, or in European football is what he wanted to work into. But he wasn't a player. He'd never been in that space, and he didn't have any connections into it. So what happened? Well, he wrote a book. He wrote a book about his own expertise. He grew up in India, and he'd actually spent his time, playing soccer there, knew the market. And he wrote a book talking about why he thought India was the next great market to find the next Ronaldo or Messi. Now, this guy was only 19 years old, but he wrote this book. He interviewed smart people. He shared the book out with them. And sure enough, when the book came out, he got hired by a scouting organization that wanted to go into India. He was only 19. He wasn't an expert in a lot of the ways that we see it, but he had demonstrated expertise. So I think part of it is, if you want to use it to break into something new, rather sometimes than going out and getting, a degree or starting over, can you wind up creating expertise in a book? That's a really powerful example of it. The second thing that I think is really helpful as someone who wants to sort of have that outcome is, many times people want to elevate their voice. They want to do more speaking. They want to do more workshops and trainings. And so I think that's a really interesting second piece that people will oftentimes have. Interesting enough, I'll tell the story of a guy named Derek Gaunt. Derek is an author of mine. He wrote a book really about the power of empathy. And Derek is today one of the leading, he was signed by CIA as one of their featured keynote speakers. Wow. He was a former police hostage negotiator who wrote a book on empathy, and now is one of the top sales trainers on the planet. Works directly with Chris Voss, who, Never Split the Difference.
Wow, yeah, totally.
So that's an example of it, right? Like, how do you demonstrate that expertise to transition into something new? You do it in a book. The last one that I think is another kind of outcome that sometimes people will want is they want to basically use it to start a company or a business in those ways. And so I think some of it is like, okay, I want to use it to demonstrate my expertise, to get jobs, to get promoted, whatever it is. The second one is I want to use it to elevate my profile in some way or the other. And the third one I think is to start a company is one of those pieces of it. And I think the interesting thing behind this one is that using a book can basically create those early clients. There's a woman named, not a woman, there's a man named Nate Adrosky, had a small design agency and wanted to really grow it, talking about the power of behavior science. And so, he wasn't someone who did a lot of selling, nor did he like to sell. So he wrote a book demonstrating what their specialty was. And then he sent the book out to prospects. What happened? They called him. $1 million deals started coming in. Their company made the Inc. 5000 and really helped them, build a business. So I think those are kind of some of the interesting outcomes that you can think about. Again, from it, whether it's I want to elevate my voice to kind of get into a new field, I want to elevate my voice to kind of create new business and leadership and speaking opportunities, or I want to use it to build a company. All of those are very powerful ways. And I always think about, you've got this awesomeness inside you. The book is really the gasoline to get you there a lot faster.
What a great metaphor. Let's fuel those dreams, guys. And honestly, you again, as a little shameless plug that is not shameless at all, is check out the link in the description of this video to book time with Eric. I've had calls with him, and you're going to get a paradigm shift in that call. He's going to illuminate something you didn't know and didn't think of. So I encourage you to do that. Okay. But hey, we're going to get you a lot of value in the rest of this video. Actually, some value yet. Strategies for modern authors. So Eric, first off, I have an idea of some of the strategies, so I'll kind of tee you up for it. How do you think about a category? That's a new category for your idea for a book that's easily shareable by word of mouth?
Yeah. So it's a really important thing to understand. I think that, there are lots of books out there, and my goal is to not have you write a book that is just like anyone else. Nor do you want to start a company that's just like anyone else or be a speaker that's like anyone else. So what's really interesting today to understand is that one of the fastest ways to get to where you want to be, whether it's as a company or an organization or your own company, is not to try and find your niche, but to identify a gap. And so what I've learned here when you study all the world's best books is what they do is they define a new category. And what they're doing here is they're looking for something that's missing out there in the world. And I'm going to put you back on the spot a little bit here, right? As you are kind of defining your own role, Chris, as trying to basically teach people about sales as a life transformation tool. There's a lot of people who are teaching sales out there. There's a lot of organizations that offer sales training, and yet you have a different bend in it. It's not about like that kind of old world idea of like, sort of Glengarry, Glen Ross. You believe that sales is something different. So as you look at what you're trying to do, talk to the audience a little bit about what's missing out there in your mind about in the world of training people to be salespeople who may not have ever considered it.
Yeah, it's an evolving conversation I'm having with myself, and with you. I talk to myself, but just, building authentic sales skills, your own authentic sales style, which is actually a form of your own self-expression, to increase your ability to make an impact in the areas of life that matter most. I want to make sales skills more accessible to everyone and also blow up that stigma that sales is sleazy. I think of SpongeBob. I told you this. There's an episode where SpongeBob's in a back alley and it's dark and scary and you think someone creepy is going to pop out. And he's like, I've got a feeling that someone's trying to sell me something. And it's a fish with a briefcase that runs off. It's that classic, like, ooh, salesperson, used car salesperson. I don't want to deal with it. But I want to blow that up and help people realize that sales, when practiced in integrity, is actually a true self-expression of who we are. And it can actually help improve our relationships, our dating life, our ability to even like, I don't know, right? You're trying to raise money for a charity or start a charity. You're trying to, sell amazing ideas that could lift people up. I think to sell is human, in the words of Dan Pink, that's supposedly your neighbor, and sometimes you get his mail. So feel free to give some feedback too, but I'm still figuring out, but that's my angle.
So I think what's important to think about, and again, I think this is one of the things that Chris and I spent some time on early about is, you want to find a way to be different. And you want to figure out something's missing out there. And so as we talked about it, great books define a new category. And they do that in one of two ways. So all the world's best books, when you study what they do, is they're trying to identify a gap that's out there. And what I find is there's two ways that you can identify a gap. Number one, you can do it by defining a new type of person, a person that we can aspire to be, or a new type of action we could aspire to do. So type of person, type of action. And so when you think about your books, usually you want to say is like, I want to teach people to be a new type of person, like an outlier, like Malcolm Gladwell, or originals like Adam Grant, or The Go-Giver by Bob Burg, or Untamed by Glennon Doyle. So the first thing to think about is there's this new opportunity to create a new person. And so, for example, in your world, Chris, you could say that I want to teach people to be an impact seller. I want someone who can sell impact and that kind of thing. And so one idea for a book is saying, I want to share everyone how they can be an impact seller. That's one opportunity. So thinking about who you could be. The other one is thinking about actions you could do. So and thinking something that you could do. So Start With Why by Simon Sinek, Brave the Wilderness by Brene Brown, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, Think Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman, Eat, Pray, Love by Liz Gilbert. All these are examples of actions you could aspire to do. So on that side of that one, you could say, I want to teach people to build an impact through sales, like that idea behind it. So a lot of those things is what we're trying to do is figure out there's a gap missing out there. No one else or not many people out there are talking about how I could become an impact seller or I could build impact through sales. And so that's really the first thing is identify something that's missing out there. Why does that matter? Well, it's really hard to differentiate yourself from, Chris Voss and, Grant Cardone, who have these established sales things that they do. Yep. Instead, you want to figure out they're missing something. They're leaving something on the table that's not reaching a particular audience, a particular time. And so what does that do? People are attracted to you rather than trying to take people from other people. And that's what a category is about. And all the world's best books tend to do it because they paint the world as what's missing out there and say, if you want to learn how to do this to fill this gap, I can be the one to do it. And that's why the category design is so important. I liken it for an author to a lot like the compass. It's going to guide you. You're going to tweak and change along the way, but there's an opportunity to fill a gap through my own learning, my teaching in those ways.
So why should you build a book rather than write it?
It's a great question. And that's the second part of this one that I think is really important. Once an author figures out that category they're going after, the hard part is how do you actually go and write it? And I think as we talked about, so much of this is going to change along the way. Chris and I talked a week ago, and it's still one of those things that I'm forming things. I'm not sure where it's going behind it. And so it's really hard for people is they get stuck because they're like, well, I got to have it all figured out. I need to have the perfect table of contents, everything before I can write. And so that's why I actually teach people to not try and worry about writing a book, because writing a book has this concept of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. What I encourage people to do is go out and build the pieces that we're going to form into the book. And that's a really interesting way to understand it. The first thing to know is there's an architecture to a book. A book has structures to it. And the way Dan Pink writes it, the way Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, there's structure to it. So what I teach people to do is you want to start making progress on your book, making that momentum. So the first thing that I'll actually be helping Chris do is I'll help him write smaller pieces. So we know that in his book, Chris is going to need to have stories of other people who use sales to change their life, stories of other people who learned the process of selling. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sit down and not worry about writing the book. We're going to start capturing stories of people that we think can teach us something. Some of those will be those stories of your own life. That is the experience of interviewing, the experience of all those things from your life. Some of them will be people from your interview. You might sit down with Dan Pink and get things from him. Other people might be those. We'll make that happen. Don't you worry. Dan's my neighbor. We'll get him in there. But I think the biggest thing to know is what you want to do is that you need stories. So rather than trying to figure out where they're going to go, we're going to learn how to write those stories. And what's interesting about it is now you're going to have this bundle of stories, these bundles of pieces. Now what you do is you build the book. So when you start taking chapters, you say, okay, I've learned as I've been writing this stuff that I know I want to have a chapter on vulnerability. I want to have a chapter on empathy. I want to have a chapter on, impact, whatever it may be. So now what you do is you don't start from a blank page. You say, okay, here's some thoughts on maybe some structures of it. I've got this interesting story that Eric told me. I've got this personal story behind it. And now I've got a starting point. And now I fit stuff together to make an argument. So the biggest thing I will tell people is don't try to write a book. Instead, try to write the small pieces. And usually the early work I would encourage you to do is keep your early writing to 300 to 800 words. Smaller chunks along the way that will fit into it. And for most of us, those are going to be in the aspect of stories. So figure out what stories you want to include. For a nonfiction writer, about 60 to 80% of the content is story content coming from your life, stories in your life, stories from people you interview, and stories from people you research. If you're doing a creative book like a memoir or a novel, 100% is going to be from stories. So you want to break it down into these moments or these scenes that you're going to tell. But I usually tell people is don't try to start writing chapters until you've created at least 10,000 words of stories, at least, again, sort of 12 to 15 stories before I worry about how I stitch it together into what will become a chapter.
It's so cool to get concrete advice on how to break up this beast into smaller parts. And stories, I say it all the time because it's true, and we all know it now, are so powerful. in terms of bringing people in and connecting emotionally. So thank you for that look under the hood. And now I want to go into the hood of this specific topic of book release. How do you reverse engineer from book release to, day one, so that you set yourself up to drive business opportunities?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question too. Because what I'll tell you is books are a really unique product. And they're a really unique product because they require recommendations, right? So, if someone is going to recommend my book, right, they can't just really look at the cover, right? They actually have to pick it up. They have to have it. They have to read it, and they have to sort of think that it's good enough to recommend. So what's interesting to understand about books is the average book doesn't sell very many copies. 98% of books will sell less than 100 copies, which is crazy to think about. Very, very low numbers of it. And the reason is because they never get that recommendation to the engine going. So what I always tell people to do is to think about not how you can publish your book, but how can you announce your book and build a community around it. So what's interesting about this process here is that what you want to do is you want to get people involved in the book. So what I will always encourage an author to do is don't think about I'm going to publish this in a year or whatever it is. Instead, think about a moment when you can announce it and invite people to become part of it. And what we do in manuscripts is we actually design this entire announcement around creating a moment to announce the book and sell tickets to your launch event. So the neat thing for Chris is when it comes down to Q1 of this year, we're going to do something fun and crazy, and we're going to come back live. So I'm calling it here in early March. I'm coming in, and we're going to announce this book. And what's cool about it is we're going to give everyone in this channel and everyone across your network the opportunity to become part of it. And what's neat about it is all these people are going to be able to come celebrate you. They're going to buy a ticket to your launch event to get a special signed copy from you. Then they're going to get the book early to read it and give you feedback on it, make it better, get their name in the book. And what's so powerful about that is this is how you create evangelists. And you talked earlier about my experience with my 2 books. So I'm going to do a little bit of a quick storytelling. So I did 2 books last year, which I do not recommend for anyone. I did a novel project with my daughter called Pennymores. It's a middle grade book, kind of in the Harry Potter-ish vein. Super fun. It's done incredibly well, 15,000 copies. It was a finalist for Goodreads Book of the Year for kids. How in the world does someone who is not a teacher, doesn't have an audience, sell 15,000 copies? I'll tell you in a second. Because then 4 months later, I put out a second book, a nonfiction book called Super Mentors. And this is a nonfiction book aimed at helping people understand modern mentorship. The thesis on this book is that you don't need a mentor, you need a project. Now, both books sold incredibly well. There wasn't some marketing budget behind them. Why? Well, the reason is I focused on creating fans. So with both books, I did one common thing, and that is I had almost 1,000 people read the book before it was done. 1,000 people gave feedback on it. I took their feedback, incorporated it. And what happened is they went from being people who were interested in the book to fans of it. And every one of those people we learn will tell 3 to 5 more people to buy your book. So if you really want to build a book that's successful, you want to find a way to think differently about fans and readers. Fans are people that you want to get involved in the book. They want to do more. They want to hear you speak, get a signed copy. They want to be a part of it. So activate your fans, people in your circles already that are buying you, and then they will lead you to readers. So reverse engineering it. And I usually tell people 6 months from the time you start, you want to have a draft done so you can announce it, get people involved in it, and help them make the book exceptional from there.
Is there anything else you'd add to creating a community of fans and beta readers and that you haven't hit on as we just finish up that point?
Yeah, I think that what I would tell you is sometimes people think about this idea of fans as people who are fans of the book. And so, from your standpoint, Chris, you've got a book about selling and impact. And I think sometimes people are like, okay, I've got this network of people around me. I've got, 10,000 people who are on my LinkedIn, who are on my Facebook, who are on my, YouTube behind it. I need to find just the people who are going to love the book. And what I will tell you about this early thing is you need to find people who love Chris. And so the neat part about it is when you announce the book, you want to invite everyone who are in your circles. Quite frankly, I want you to invite your 3rd grade crush to become part of this book launch event. I want you to invite, people who are current business colleagues and friends, because remember, they're here to celebrate you. The most important thing to know is when you invite fans in, they're excited for you, man. 98.7% of people have never gotten to this point and they wish they had. And so when you think about this is more about building a community to celebrate celebrate you over anything else, the whole thing gets a lot more fun along the way. So that's my big guidance here, is to remember that you don't need people to be the perfect reader or the person who will most be the person who's a client or whatever it is, but think more holistically about who are fans of you.
Oh, I love that. I'm picturing myself at like in a parade, and I got all my friends cheering, and I got a nice visual, and it's getting me motivated to embark on this journey. So Des showed up, and I know she's got a couple books in the making that she's working on completing at some point. So I feel like this is such a good interview for her. She loved your gap filling gem, like fill a gap. I did too. And she also asked a question. Just confirming on your what you said about writing 10,000 words. She said, so we flesh out fiction books by writing 10,000 word pieces. Is that correct? Understanding correctly?
Yeah, it's great. So first off, great to see you guys. Thanks for coming here. And I think what I'll tell you is the different things. So we break our category of books into sort of nonfiction style books. We think of nonfiction as like kind of the business style, the Adam Grant, Simon Sinek style. And then the other style is what we call a creative book. Now, creative books are story driven. They have an arc to them. So they can be fiction. Here's like, Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, or they can be memoir style books. So Eat, Pray, Love, Molly's Game Wild. Now, what defines all those ones is they have an overall story arc to them. That's the difference. So a nonfiction book has a different structure to it. There's no kind of overall arc. You don't have to get to the end to get a lot out of it. In fact, true story, only 25% of people that read your nonfiction book will get to the conclusion. So the truth of the matter is people can have life-changing experience from a nonfiction book and only read the introduction of the first couple chapters. Fiction and creative books are different. So how do you start writing a memoir or a novel? Well, what we've learned is you actually want to reverse engineer in the same way. So what you'll find, and this is something I found so interesting from Pennymore's, a novel project, is when you ask someone what they loved about your book, what's interesting is will happen is most people will be able to identify 6 to 8 moments in the story that they loved. We call these the moments that matter. These are these peaks. They're moments of triumph, of tension, and overcoming, whatever they may be, these key moments. And so what I encourage authors to do is first identify the 6 to 8 most important moments they know need to happen. For me, there's this amazing library scene in Pennymore's that I knew had to be in there. There's this really great sort of part of it where we have them, again, kind of this failure mode. There's these things that happen, you want to do. So what are the first things you write? Well, you don't try to write from moment 0 of the story to the end. Instead, you identify these anchor moments, these column moments that are really important. And so you write those 10,000 words first. Why? Because they're the most important ones. They're the things people are going to remember. So you focus on those first, and then you figure out how they fit together and you stitch it from there. But it's kind of like thinking a little bit like a movie designer. If you think about a movie designer like a Michael Bay, right, who does Transformers, Michael Bay in his mind can see these big moments where there's going to be huge explosions, stuff like that. He's planning the entire budget around these things that are the signature moments. Same thing in writing a creative story. Identify your 6 to 8 signature moments, or we call them the moments that matter. Write those pieces first and then build the book around those, because frankly, that's what your reader is going to remember anyways. And if it's good enough for Michael Bay, it's good enough for all of us.
Yeah, no, if it's good enough for Michael Bay, then it's good enough for May.
That's right.
See what I did there? Okay, dad jokes. Okay, I got a couple more questions for you. We got about 6 minutes left. We know you're a busy guy, so thank you for the time. And thank you for your time and attention. And I'm speaking to the audience for showing up live. And for those who will show up to come, as this floats out in the evergreen YouTube sea. So, okay, what was my question? I lost my train of thought. Let me check real quick. Okay, I have a couple more. It's clear you're a big thinker, you're a lifelong learner, and you try and have a sense of humor in what you do. And, I was honestly looking off your LinkedIn profile, but I know those are, values that are important to you. Could you speak to how important these qualities have been to your success and what they mean to you?
Yeah, it's fun to sort of think about those ways. Earlier with Des's question a little bit about trying to, these moments that matter. I think what I've learned in my life is I am someone who collects moments that matter. And I think that's really what I would sort of say behind it is I want to be able to go back and be able to say, I've had these incredible, interesting, fun, unique moments that matter. And so that's kind of my philosophy. And it really does fit into the way I view my life, success, and those things, is to say that every year, if I can look back and have said, there's one big thing that I've accomplished this year. So for me, this next year, I'm looking to accomplish the next Penny Moore's books and launch it with my daughter. So that's a big thing that I want to accomplish. But I always think about what are the smaller things that I'm going to do along the way. So we're going to Myrtle Beach next week as these moments that matter. And so I think a lot of it is that way. I think about my life as a book, and each year is going to have 12 chapters. And I want to make sure I've got an overall arc for it that I can say, this was the big thing, and these smaller pieces along the way. And quite frankly, like, I hope there's a lot of people who want to come onto it and be characters in the story. But that's kind of how I view life, is like these, do something meaningful every year that's going to stand out and stick out.
Yeah. One big takeaway from this conversation is chase the meaning, and that's what just makes life special, and the money will follow. The connection will follow as well. And, I definitely want to encourage anyone out there again who has this dream of writing a book, to connect with Eric through the link in the description of this video. Or maybe you don't, and you're just an entrepreneurial person that has big ambition, and at least maybe have a conversation about why it might be impactful towards your goals. Because I think there are people out there that might not even realize that writing a book could be the thing they need to get at the next level, to charge more for their speaking gigs, to get a promotion, to get a job opportunity that they always dreamed of. And it's interesting because it might even be an opportunity to, like in my world, to break into a new category like tech sales when you have no experience. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask you about what what living a full life looks like to you. And you already answered that, pursuing meaning, and almost, I'd love this idea of being the author of your own story, and we can get the script and literally and metaphorically write it. But is there anything else that you would add to like what living fully looks like to you?
Yeah. The last thing I'll say, I think, to your audience is this, and I think it's, I mentioned, this is not a plug, but this is basically to talk a little bit about this book here called Super Mentors. And I think you talked about the idea a little bit of, I love books, and books are something important to me, but there's some research that I did to understand, what are those things in our life that we can do that can lead to these inflection points, these moments that change our trajectory behind it. And so what I actually found is books are one of the things that are commonly done. But there's actually 9 projects that we saw, not 9, which are right. There we go, 9 projects that we found out there, and books are just one of them. So what are these other kind of like projects that matter? Well, we found these 9 projects, and what I would tell you is you want to find projects that are meaningful to you, that are things you can complete, and lastly, they're collaborative. The most important thing, I think, for anyone who wants to find happiness, growth, learning, and those things is to find a project that you can work on that will drive meaning in your life, but don't do it alone. You want to have a podcast that you can interview people on to build those relationships. You want to have a book that you can bring people into and talk about and get them to read it. You might want to have an event that you put on that invites people together into it. There's numbers of different projects, but projects in our lives, to me, are the best way to learn, the best way to grow, and the best way to build meaning and relationships that are deep. And that's really what we found with Super Mentors, is that if you're looking to build relationships of not just mentors, but super mentors, find a way to collaborate, figure out a way that you can work on something together, and that will build relationships that last. And that's the biggie for anyone who wants to understand how to create meaning. Find a project that you can collaborate with others on.
Wow. And I was just at the National Speakers Association because I do have a dream of being a keynote speaker alongside writing a book. I know the book will help for that. And there was $1 million speaker, Delatore McNeil, who is on CNBC. He actually agreed to come on the channel probably in September and working with his admin, which is exciting, guys. But he reached out to Les Brown. Do you know Les Brown? He's like a very famous person. And I guess and there's a guy, Willie Jolly, who's also just was inducted in the Speakers Hall of Fame. Another great speaker like Les Brown. And supposedly I heard the story that he reached out and said, how can I help? Exactly what you're saying. Like, he supported them, and then they become his super mentors. And now he's the multi-million-dollar speaker on CNBC, I'm not sure. But so I wanted to ask you though, real quick, 2 more questions. What are the other types of projects at a high level that are on top of writing a book?
Yeah, so they're the ones that we identified. So we found this actually in the research we studied the Forbes 30 under 30. And so we wanted to figure out like what made them unique, and 84% of them had a collaborative project like this. So I'll give you the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. They're all in the book. And if anyone here on the channel wants a digital copy of the book, please just DM me on LinkedIn and I will get you a free digital copy of Super Mentors as well. I love the book as a way to change people's lives. So definitely reach out in that one. Anyone in there, reach out to it. Happy to get you a free copy of the book.
Love that.
Examples, obviously book is one. Podcast, a video series, like a video kind of show in that one is another one. Putting on an event or a conference is another one. Putting on some kind of a concert, some kind of designing a product, doing research. I think there's a couple other ones, but those are basically kind of the concepts behind it. They're projects that are what we call finishable. They're something that you can complete in 1 year or less typically. They're collaborative and they're usually something that's tied to your meaning and purpose.
So guys, my call to action to you, aside from, again, booking time with Eric, linked in the description of this video, and maybe reaching out on LinkedIn and getting a copy of his Super Mentors book, which I'd love one myself, Eric.
You got it. Coming your way.
To start to think like, I think the book may be the project, but also just think of other projects that might be worth shouldering that burden and putting in the work and grinding to experience the meaning on the other side. And I just wanted to say, Eric, I really appreciate your time and your, not just your ideas, but your passion and your energy. It elevated me. It elevated the audience. And you packed this thing in with.
We did a lot in an hour, man. That was a ton.
I mean, we covered a lot. And so one final thing, I'm going to take you to 2001, or maybe you probably have more than 2000 or 2000 plus, no. But at the Romean, there is another author, right? And maybe someone else listening out here now or in the future out in the Evergreen Sea, they come across this video and they're going to add another tick to the list as you get to 10,000. So we got 8,000 more. Can you just finish up talking a little bit more about the Modern Author Accelerator Program, how people can think about it and what, I guess, just ending on a high note on that its vision and how they can get plugged in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I'll say, and again, is I've learned that for me, you need help to finish hard things. And so you need collaborators and you need coaches. Yeah. And so we built the Modern Author Accelerator as a community-based program to help anyone who has an idea and wants to use their book to create those inflection points. So it's usually something for people who, maybe a coach who wants to use this book to grow their platform. They want to be a speaker and they want to use their book that way. Maybe they want to do more instructions, workshops, coaching, and entrepreneurs. So it's fun. It's a neat community-based approach. I love it. And as I told Chris, I'm working on my new book here this fall, my new nonfiction book, in addition to Pennymore's. So not only am I a believer in it as a tool for other people, but it's a tool that I use because, frankly, like none of us, our philosophy in all this one is never write alone. And if you can find a way to sort of never write alone, you'll do something pretty special.
Yeah, who knows the personal transformation, the self-esteem, the breakthroughs in self-expression, the new relationships, and the money that could flow from starting with Eric and writing a book. And what I love, Eric, is you're in integrity. You have written books yourself. You've applied this yourself. And I'm in integrity too, in saying I encourage you to connect with Eric because I'm doing it myself and investing in the program. So Eric, thank you so much for the time. We went 3 minutes over. Thank you for going the distance with us and sprinting through the finish line. Guys, to your success in tech sales, as an author, and in life, happy selling and happy living, and we'll see you in the next one.